Nobody ever expects a disaster on a night so perfectly staged. Upstate New York's spring air buzzed with the hum of luxury cars rolling up a winding drive, headlights slicing through evening mist as guests arrived for the annual Riverbend Equestrian Charity Gala. The sprawling estate, owned by the Vance family for 3 generations, was alive with champagne toasts, clinking cutlery under the lights of a clear tent, and the low, confident voices of people who believed their money could solve any problem. Inside the grand stable, horses shifted restlessly, coats brushed to gold, manes braided tight for the camera crews, and wide-eyed children peeking through the rails. Solara, the Palomino mare everyone whispered about, stood tall in her stall, golden coat glowing even under dim barn lights. Her white mane rippled every time she shook her head, ears flicking back and forth at the unfamiliar commotion. She was more than just a champion. To some, she was a lucky charm, to others a ticket to the next big trophy or viral moment. By 9 o'clock, clouds had gathered, thick and blue-black. No one noticed at first. Most were too caught up in speeches, bids, selfies with politicians. It was only when a sharp clap of thunder split the air, rattling wine glasses and setting off a chain of nervous whinnies in the barn, that the first hint of danger crept in. Raindrops smacked the tent with sudden force. Guests gasped, clutching programs and gowns, the smell of ozone mixing with spilled Chardonnay. But in the barn, chaos erupted. Lightning streaked so close the electricity flickered. Horses reared and bucked. A handler lost his grip on the lead rope of a bay gelding, who crashed sideways into Solara's stall door, splintering the latch. Solara's nostrils flared, her eyes rolling white, memories flickering deep inside her of storms, running, escape. A flash, another boom. Solara wheeled, slamming her shoulder against the door, feeling it give. Panic shot through her. She bolted forward, stumbling out into the muddy paddock, hooves kicking up clumps of wet grass as wind howled around her. The fence was barely a shadow in the rain, but instinct overruled training. With one desperate surge, she gathered herself and leapt, clearing the rails in a single golden arc, vanishing into the wild storm-soaked darkness. Shouts echoed behind her. Handlers scrambled, boots sucking in the mud. A frantic voice shouted, "Get the gates! Lock down the roads!" The lights from the gala glimmered like lighthouses on a violent sea. But Solara kept running, guided by something older than fear, deeper than training. Memories of a boy's gentle hand, a quiet barn, laughter echoing on summer mornings long ago. The storm ripped tree branches down as she ran, thunder rolling so loud it drowned out the sound of her own labored breaths. She slid down a ditch, waded through thick, knee-high water, scrambled up the far bank. Mud caked her legs, scratches lined her chest and flank where the brambles bit, but she pressed on, adrenaline mixing with the strange certainty that she was running to something, not away. Behind her, the search began. Guests, now herded indoors, watched news crews arrive, the Vance family's publicists delivering crisp, anxious statements. Solara, our beloved champion, appears to have been spooked by the storm. She may have been stolen or simply lost her way in panic. We ask the public to keep an eye out. There is a substantial reward. In truth, as the storm wound down and the world stilled to a drizzle, Solara was already miles away, picking her way through the woods with trembling limbs, every shadow a memory. A deer bolted in front of her, vanishing into the trees. An owl hooted, invisible in the high branches. Still, she moved forward, senses sharpening as the adrenaline faded and exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Sometime near dawn, the rain finally stopped. The sky turned that pale, shivering blue that only comes after a night of thunder and fear. Solara limped, her energy spent, but something drove her forward. A scent on the wind, a shape of barn and lake, faint in the distance. Every step hurt, but she kept moving, guided by hope as much as instinct. Back at the estate, rumors flared up like fresh brush fires. By morning, half the staff whispered Solara had been stolen, a disgruntled groom, a jealous rival, maybe even animal rights activists wanting to make a statement. The other half said she'd simply run wild, lost in the storm's chaos, just a horse reverting to her nature. But the truth was quieter and more complicated. Solara, battered and muddy, made her way across fields and silent roads, a specter in the morning mist. She followed the old paths, the ones she'd known as a foal, guided by memories. Apple cores tossed by a young hand, the smell of hay in a dusty sunbeam, the sound of a boy's laughter, soft and safe. She didn't know her destination, only that every step took her closer to the world she once called home. A world she hadn't seen since the day she was led, trembling and confused, into a trailer and sold away. But something in the air, something in the shape of the land itself, called her back. By the time the sun was fully up, the gala's wreckage was being cleaned. Broken glass, trampled grass, half a dozen horses needing new shoes, and fresh baths. But Solara was already gone. An impossible golden shadow lost to the woods, driven by love and memory, far beyond the reach of anyone who thought they truly owned her. And somewhere, not far from the edge of those woods, a young man named Kian sat in a quiet barn, reading to fill the silence left by his mother's absence, not knowing that destiny and an old friend was already on her way home. Dawn crept over the lake, in a hush of silver and gold, mist curling along the shoreline and blanketing the faded docks. The old farmhouse sat back from the water, tucked behind stands of maple and pine, shutters painted a weather-beaten blue. Inside the barn, Kian sat cross-legged in the hayloft, his back against a sun-warmed beam, a paperback splayed open on his knees. He'd been up for hours, sleep never coming easy since his mother's passing, and now every quiet hour seemed both a curse and a small, sacred relief. The barn smelled of cedar shavings and old leather, a place of dust motes and peace, so different from the sterile silence of hospitals and the tight, echoing spaces of grief. Kian found comfort in the rhythm of chores, stacking feed bags, mending fence rails, watching the lake through the gaps in the barn wall while his uncle worked down by the water. It was a new life, not one he'd chosen, but one he'd inherited. His mother's younger brother, Eli, a solitary man who spent his days fixing up outboards and baiting lines for tourists, had quietly invited Kian to stay for the summer. Kian suspected he might stay forever, though nobody said it out loud. It was the whinny that broke the quiet, sharp and plaintive, echoing through the morning stillness. Kian froze. For a heartbeat, he wondered if he'd imagined it, a trick of memory or hope. But there it was again, closer this time, unmistakable in its urgency. He scrambled up, dropping his book in the straw, heart pounding. The barn door creaked as he pulled it open, sunlight spilling in across the yard. At first he saw nothing but the shimmering grass and the glint of water beyond the fence. Then, limping from the edge of the woods, mud-caked and trembling, came the horse. A golden mare, streaked with rain and bramble scratches, her mane tangled but unmistakably white. Kian's breath caught in his throat. For a wild moment, he thought he might faint. He'd seen horses like her in dreams, always out of reach, always running. But this was real. She stopped at the edge of the yard, head hanging low, ribs heaving with each labored breath. He stepped forward, voice barely a whisper. "Solara?" The mare lifted her head, ears flicking forward. Recognition flickered in her dark eyes. She took a faltering step toward him, then another, stumbling on an injured leg. Kian closed the distance, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He reached out, slow and cautious, as if a sudden move might shatter the spell. His hand met her neck, warm and slick with rain and sweat, and he felt her shudder beneath his palm. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this: boy and horse, hearts hammering in fragile hope. Solara pressed her nose into Kian's chest, eyes fluttering closed. He ran trembling hands along her neck, feeling the sticky mess of blood and mud, whispering words of comfort he barely remembered learning. "It's okay. You're home. You're safe." He guided her gently toward the barn, every step an act of faith. The old boards groaned as he led her inside, away from prying eyes and curious neighbors. The familiar smells seemed to calm her. She sighed, nostrils flaring, as he eased her into the largest empty stall. Kian grabbed towels and clean water, heart pounding with panic and purpose. He cleaned her wounds with hands that shook, every scratch and bruise a fresh ache inside him. Memories tumbled back. Years ago, before the foreclosure, before everything went wrong, he'd spent entire afternoons brushing her coat, feeding her apple slices, teaching her tricks for a crowd of laughing cousins. That was another life. One he thought was gone forever, sold off piece by piece until only the ache remained. His father, distant even before the funeral, had wanted nothing to do with horses. Too expensive, too much trouble. Solara had been sold to cover debts, Kian's pleas ignored in the face of bank notice and hollow promises. Now, looking at her battered frame, he wondered how far she'd come, what dangers she'd outrun, what memories had called her back. He wondered, too, how long he could keep her hidden. Uncle Eli was kind but practical, and even out here news traveled fast. The sound of boots crunching gravel outside made Kian tense. Uncle Eli stepped into the barn, cap pulled low, fishing tackle in hand. He stopped dead when he saw the mare, jaw dropping open. For a long moment he just stared, eyes darting from Solara's golden coat to the panic in Kian's face. "Kian," he said, voice low and steady. "Where'd she come from?" Kian swallowed, words tumbling out in a rush. How she'd come limping from the woods, how he'd recognized her immediately, how she'd let him touch her, how he was sure it was really her. Eli listened, silent but watchful, the way men do when measuring truth against trouble. When Kian finished, Eli just nodded, knelt to inspect Solara's injured leg, and muttered, "Well, she's here now. Let's see what we can do." They worked together in silence, doctoring wounds, making a mash from oats and honey. As they worked, memories flooded back, flashbacks Kian couldn't stop. The day his mother had surprised him with Solara as a foal, the first time he'd led her on a halter, her muzzle brushing his cheek when he cried after his father's funeral. He remembered the way she'd nickered for him at dawn, and the softness in his mother's eyes whenever she watched them together. By afternoon, Solara was resting in the stall, her sides rising and falling in slow, exhausted rhythm. Kian sat beside her, one hand in her mane, not caring about the mud on his jeans or the ache in his knees. For the first time in months, a sliver of hope pierced the fog of grief. A sense that maybe, just maybe, some things lost could still be found. He knew, deep down, that trouble would follow. Horses didn't just show up out of nowhere. Not ones as famous as Solara. The world would come looking. But for this one sacred day, he let himself believe in miracles. As dusk settled over the lake, and the first stars blinked to life, Kian whispered, "I won't let anyone take you again. Not ever." Unbeknownst to him, a storm far different from last night's was already gathering. A storm of suspicion, envy, and unwanted attention that would soon sweep into their quiet sanctuary, threatening to rip away the fragile peace Kian and Solara had found. But for now, in the soft golden hush of the barn, they were just a boy and his horse, reunited at last. Morning on the lake was usually a quiet thing, a mosaic of bird calls, the slap of water on stones, and the low rumble of Eli's truck starting up at dawn. For Kian, the day after Solara's return should have felt like a secret gift tucked between the hours. But as the sun rose higher, that sense of sanctuary began to slip away. Every sound, the crunch of tires on gravel, the bark of the neighbor's dog, felt like a warning. He busied himself with chores, pitching hay, and refilling water buckets, but his eyes kept drifting to the stall where Solara rested, her golden coat dulled by mud, but her spirit starting to return. After breakfast, Kian pulled out his old phone and snapped a quick photo of Solara, mostly to convince himself she was real. He didn't dare send it to anyone, not even Layla, his childhood friend from the next county over. The risk was too great. For now, the secret would stay between him, Eli, and the soft-muzzled mare who had already come too far to be lost again. But news in small towns moves on its own currents. Mid-morning, while Kian was scrubbing buckets by the barn, he heard voices on the other side of the fence. A couple of hikers, city folks in bright jackets, talking loud to mask their nerves, had paused at the trail that skirted Eli's land. One of them, a young woman with a big camera slung over her chest, froze and pointed. "Whoa, look at that horse!" Kian's heart stopped. He ducked behind the water barrel, praying Solara would stay hidden, but she was already curious, her head poking out from the shadows. white mane like a beacon. The hiker snapped half a dozen photos before Kian could think, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey," he called, trying to sound casual. "She's not up for visitors. She's injured. Came in from the storm last night." "Oh, sorry," the woman said, grinning, oblivious. "She's gorgeous. That coat looks like she belongs in a magazine. Is she a rescue?" "Yeah," Kian lied, forcing a smile. "She just showed up. Probably belongs to someone around here, but we'll check." They didn't linger. A minute later, their voices faded into the trees. Kian exhaled, trying to shake off the dread settling in his gut, but he knew the truth. One photo in the digital age could start a wildfire. He tried to distract himself, fixing the paddock gate, brushing Solara, texting Layla about nothing important. But by late afternoon, the first ripple hit. Layla sent him a link. "Hey, is this you guys?" To a local Facebook group post. A photo of Solara, muddy and tired but unmistakably striking, captioned, "Lost champion horse found?" Dozens of comments followed. That's the Vance mare, right? She's worth a fortune. Call animal control." Within hours, the post had racked up hundreds of shares, spreading from local pages to equestrian groups, then to statewide news. Photos of Solara from her show days were posted side by side with the grainy image from the hiking trail. The internet did what it always does: speculated, argued, and went looking for someone to blame. Kian's phone buzzed nonstop. Old friends, acquaintances, even a couple of reporters fishing for a scoop. The story had grown legs. Margot Vance herself, owner of the Riverbend estate, and the woman who'd paid top dollar for Solara years before, reposted the photo on her public page with a clipped formal message. "If anyone has information about the whereabouts of my horse, please contact Riverbend Stables or local authorities. She is a beloved member of our family and is greatly missed." By dusk, the barn felt smaller, the air inside tighter. Eli came in from the porch, frowning. "They're saying on the news it might be theft," he said quietly, rubbing his hands together. "Margot Vance's people have money, lawyers, friends in the sheriff's department. We should be careful, Kian. This could get messy." Kian felt his cheeks burn. "She ran here, Eli. I didn't steal her. She remembers this place. She remembers me." I know that," Eli replied, softer now. "But the law's the law. If they come looking, we have to be smart. Keep her quiet. Keep her safe. No more photos. Understand?" Kian nodded, guilt and fear warring inside him. All he wanted was to protect Solara, to keep her from being torn away again. But he could feel the world closing in, a world that didn't care about memories, only about property and paperwork. That night, Kian barely slept. He sat by Solara's stall, stroking her nose, telling her stories from the old days. How they used to race along the orchard fence, how she'd nuzzle him for treats after chores. In the soft darkness, she seemed to relax, her breathing slowing, eyes fluttering half-closed. But outside, the storm of suspicion raged. Margot Vance's lawyer sent a curt, official notice to Eli's email. "Return of stolen property demand. Immediate compliance required." The sheriff's deputy left a voicemail, polite but firm about arranging a visit. The comments online grew nastier. Accusations, threats, demands. Some people championed Kian as a hero. Others painted him as a thief. Layla, loyal as ever, called to check on him. "You okay?" she whispered, voice tight with worry. "Do you want me to come over?" Kian shook his head, though she couldn't see it. "Not yet. I need to think. I need to figure out what to do." In the small hours before dawn, he wandered outside and looked up at the sky, searching for answers in the stars. Solara watched him from her stall, eyes calm and steady. In that moment, he made himself a promise. No matter what came next, lawyers, sheriffs, headlines, he would fight for her, for the memories they shared, for the truth only they understood. He could know that tomorrow would bring TV crews, animal control officers, and Margot Vance's handlers to their quiet lakeside world. but he could feel it coming, as inevitable as another summer storm. In the hush before morning, Kian pressed his forehead to Solara's and whispered, "I won't let them take you. I swear." The wind rustled the grass, and somewhere far away, another notification pinged. A story spiraling, a battle beginning, a secret now impossible to keep. The next morning broke heavy and gray, the sky threatening more rain. Kian's anxiety twisted tighter with every hour. He had barely managed to get a few hours of restless sleep, and when he did, his dreams were full of sirens, galloping hooves, and the sharp voice of Margot Vance echoing through the woods. By the time the sun crested over the trees, there was already movement at the edge of the property. A line of trucks, SUVs, and one van emblazoned with the county animal control logo. News vans followed in their wake, local reporters with heavy cameras piling out like hungry birds. It was as if the world had turned inside out overnight, and the quiet safety of the lake cabin had been traded for a circus. Kian heard the first slam of car doors while mucking out Solara's stall. He stiffened, heart in his throat, as Eli came in from the porch. The older man's jaw was set tight. "They're here," he said quietly, eyes troubled. "Animal control, some woman in a suit, and—" He hesitated, glancing toward the lake. "That's Margot Vance, and her people. There's even a TV crew." Kian's stomach dropped. Solara, sensing his tension, sidled closer, bumping her velvet nose against his shoulder. "Stay calm, girl," he whispered, voice shaking. "I won't let them hurt you." A heavy knock rattled the barn doors. Eli moved first, stepping out into the open, his stance protective but measured. Kian stayed just behind, his hand never leaving Solara's neck. The group filed in, an officer in a green vest with animal control stitched over his chest, a tall, broad-shouldered man in expensive boots, a woman in a tailored suit, Margot Vance herself, and two handlers carrying leather leads and halters. Behind them, a news cameraman and a reporter jostled for a good angle. Margot Vance's eyes landed on Solara with the cold focus of someone who measured value in trophies, not heartbeats. "That's my horse," she said flatly. That man should be returned immediately. Kian's mouth went dry. Eli answered before he could, voice low but strong. "She showed up here injured after the storm. We took care of her. Nobody here stole anything, Mrs. Vance." Animal control stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "We have an official notice for the recovery of missing property. Please step aside." Kian's hands tightened in Solara's mane. The handlers moved in with practiced efficiency, voices calm but patronizing. "It's all right, boy. We'll take her from here." But Solara had other ideas. The moment the first handler snapped a lead toward her, she reared back, hooves flailing dangerously close to the barn wall. The second handler tried to circle behind, but Solara spun, eyes rolling wild, body tense and coiled. "Easy, girl. Easy," the man coaxed, but his confidence wavered when Solara bared her teeth and snapped at the halter. A camera flash went off, blinding in the dim barn. The news crew scrambled to catch the chaos. Shouts, the clatter of hooves, a scramble of hay as Solara bucked with a violence nobody expected from a docile show horse. One handler tripped, sprawling in the straw, his arm nearly crushed by a glancing kick. The crowd gasped. The camera crew nearly got knocked over as Solara wheeled, pinning everyone to the barn's far side. Kian's instincts took over. He moved in front of Solara, arms wide, blocking her from the crowd. "Stop it," he shouted, voice trembling with fury and fear. "You're scaring her. She just needs time. You can't—" He looked at Margot, pleading. "She came back to me. I didn't steal her. She remembers." The news reporter shoved a microphone forward. "Young man, are you admitting to keeping this animal without permission? Did you encourage her to escape?" Kian's eyes flashed. "She's not property. She's not a thing. She's a living soul. She's hurt and scared. She came here because she knows me. Because this is her home." Margot's face tightened, irritation slipping through her mask of calm. "This horse belongs to Riverbend Stables and is registered in my name. Your sentiment is irrelevant, young man. I'm within my legal rights." But the moment had already shifted. The drama inside the barn, Solara's panic, the handler's near injury, the shouts, and Kian's trembling defense had all been caught on camera. As the commotion calmed, the reporter whispered frantically into her phone, sending video clips to the studio. Within minutes, the footage was already being uploaded and shared across social media. Golden champion, horse freaks out, boy claims ownership. Margot Vance's team attacked. Horse sides with local teen. Hashtag spread. Hash let her stay. Hash she remembers. Outside, the gathered neighbors and curious onlookers murmured, eyes wide. A few clapped as Eli blocked the barn entrance, making it clear there'd be no easy victory for the outsiders today. Animal control, now wary, tried once more, gentler this time. Son, we have a job to do. Let us take the horse, and nobody gets hurt. Kian shook his head, trembling. She's not leaving with strangers. She's scared. At least, let me calm her. The officer hesitated, then nodded, uneasy. Kian turned back to Solara, hands shaking but voice steady as he spoke softly to her. It's okay, girl. I'm right here. You're safe with me. Solara's breathing slowed, her eyes locked on Kian's, the tension in her body slowly releasing. The camera zoomed in on the moment. Boy and horse, surrounded by chaos, holding on to each other like shipwrecked survivors. Finally, Margot Vance, seeing the optics turning against her, stepped back with a tight smile. We'll let the authorities handle this, she announced, glancing at the news crew. This will be resolved in court. As the crowd dispersed and the trucks pulled away, the news van lingered, capturing final shots of Kian stroking Solara's neck, Eli standing guard. Within hours, clips of the confrontation exploded online. Solara's wild panic, the handler's failure, and above all, Kian's desperate plea. Public opinion shifted quickly. People saw not a thief, but a grieving, determined boy fighting for a lost friend. As evening fell, Kian sat alone in the barn, overwhelmed but resolute. For the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the world might hear his side of the story. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and the next storm would be even harder to weather. News never slept, and neither did the storm now swirling around Kian, Eli, and Solara. By sunrise, their lake cabin was no longer a sanctuary, but a focal point in a story that seemed to grip half the country. Social media feeds churned with hashtags, hash let her stay, hash she remembers, hash riverbend showdown, while national news picked up the video of the golden mare lashing out and the trembling teen who held his ground. Overnight, Kian went from grieving, near-invisible small-town kid to reluctant hero, cast center stage in a battle he'd never wanted. The real trouble started with the arrival of the thick envelope, hand-delivered by a private courier. Eli opened it at the breakfast table, lips pressed thin as he read the letterhead. Margot Vance, through her legal team, was suing for the immediate return of Solara and damages for harboring stolen property. Attached was a court summons, a formal demand for them to appear at a preliminary hearing in less than a week. Damn circus, Eli muttered, sliding the paper to Kian. She's not messing around, kid. Kian stared at the document, the legal jargon swimming in front of his eyes. She's really gonna take her? His voice broke on the last word. She's going to try. Eli's tone was firm, but there was worry in his eyes, a silent question about how much fight they had left. By noon, the property swarmed with reporters and camera crews. Some tried to shove microphones in Kian's face whenever he stepped outside. Others filmed over the fence, hoping for another viral moment. A glimpse of Solara, a tear, a soundbite. More than once, Kian heard his own words from the barn played back to him on someone's phone. Strangers online debated his motives, dissected his life, speculated on his mother's death and his father's silence. There were well-wishers, too. People who left apples by the mailbox, strangers offering words of hope, or prayers taped to the gate. But the pressure was relentless. Animal control officers drove past 3 times a day. Margot's people hired a security detail to monitor the situation, though it felt more like intimidation. Even Eli, never one to back down, locked the barn every night, his shotgun propped by the door, just in case. It was late that evening, long after the last camera van left, when hope arrived in the form of a knock. A woman in her 40s, dressed plainly, carrying a battered briefcase, introduced herself as Natalie Ramirez, a pro bono animal rights lawyer. She'd seen the footage online, read the court filings, and driven through the night from Albany. "You need someone on your side," she told Eli. Her handshake is steady. "If you'll have me, I'd like to help." Natalie moved quickly, reviewing the paperwork, snapping photos of Solara's injuries, and gathering every scrap of evidence she could find. Old photos, receipts, even a faded halter embroidered with Solara's name. She questioned Kian gently but thoroughly, taking notes on his memories. The first day he'd met Solara, the training sessions, the painful day she'd been sold, his mother's last wish to look after what you love. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur. Natalie prepared her arguments, Eli and Kian fielded interview requests, and Layla, steadfast as always, snuck over after dark to help with chores. Kian's anxiety grew by the hour. He barely ate, spent his nights in the barn, whispering to Solara about his fears. The only thing that steadied him was her presence, her warm breath, her trust, the way she leaned into him whenever the noise got too loud. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, a thin layer of frost glimmering on the grass. The courthouse was packed. Reporters jockeyed for space alongside curious townsfolk and equestrian enthusiasts who had driven in from hours away. Margot arrived in a gleaming black car flanked by her handlers and a slick lawyer in a designer suit. She kept her eyes forward, but Kian could feel her gaze, sharp as glass, fixed on Solara. Natalie briefed Kian in the hallway. "Just tell the truth. Let Solara show who she trusts. That's her best chance." Inside the courtroom, the judge, a gruff woman with a reputation for fairness, listened to both sides. Margot's attorney painted Kian as a naive but misguided teen, suggested he might have lured Solara intentionally, reminded the court of the legal ownership and pedigree. "This is not about feelings or memory, Your Honor. It's about property rights." Natalie countered with photos and testimony. Solara's injuries, her history with Kian, the way she arrived on her own, battered and seeking shelter. She presented an affidavit from a neighbor who'd seen Solara limp from the woods, unaccompanied the morning after the storm. "Sometimes, Your Honor, the heart knows what the law forgets," Natalie said quietly. "Animals remember love." The judge finally asked for a demonstration. Margot's trainer approached Solara first, using her competition commands. Sharp, crisp, practiced. Solara balked, sidestepped, refused to move, ears flat with distrust. The trainer tried again, coaxing, but the mare only grew more agitated, hooves clattering against the polished floor. Then Kian stepped forward, hands open. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, just as he had 100 times before. Solara's head shot up, eyes locking on him. She let out a soft whicker and moved forward, pressing her nose into Kian's palm, all fear gone. In an instant. The courtroom went quiet. Someone in the gallery wiped away tears. The judge watched for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "For the record," she said, voice gentle, "the animal's choice is clear. But procedure was procedure. Pending further evidence, and given the animal's registered ownership, Solara is to be returned temporarily to Miss Vance until the full trial." Murmurs rippled through the room. Kian felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. Outside, the media mobbed them. Reporters called Kian a hero and a thief in the same breath. Natalie shielded him as best she could, Layla at his side. Margot's team led Solara away, but the mare balked at every step, turning again and again to look for Kian. The internet exploded. Clips of the courtroom, the moment Solara chose Kian, debates over law and loyalty. For every voice demanding justice for Margot, there were 3 demanding freedom for Solara. The legal firestorm was only just beginning, but for Kian, the most important battle, the one for Solara's heart, was far from over. The drive from the courthouse back to Riverbend was barely 20 miles, but for Solara, it felt like 1,000. As Margot's handler loaded her into the gleaming horse trailer, flashes from a dozen cameras popped outside the courthouse gates. Kian watched, numb, as the mare he loved vanished behind steel doors. The echo of her whinny, a plaintive, searching sound, cut through the roar of reporters and the whirring of broadcast vans. Kian stood frozen, Layla's hand gripping his arm as if she could anchor him to the moment. Margot Vance did not spare him a glance. She was already on the phone with her lawyer, her face set in stone. "She'll adjust," Margot said, more to herself than anyone else. "She'll be fine. We'll handle it." But as the convoy wound its way back through country roads, dark clouds gathered, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Riverbend stables had always been the stuff of local legend. A picture-perfect estate with red barns, white fences, and lush paddocks stretching out like a quilt over rolling hills. Solara had once been the jewel of Margot's collection, and a return should have been a homecoming. Instead, it felt like a funeral. Margot's staff kept their distance as the trailer doors opened and Solara stepped out, head hanging low, her golden coat marred by court dust and stress. Margot's top trainer, Dale, approached with caution. He was an old hand, soft-voiced with a deep respect for horses, but even he couldn't miss the way Solara's eyes dulled the moment the gate swung open. "Easy, girl," Dale murmured, holding out a carrot. Solara turned away, uninterested. He tried leading her into her old stall, one that had been emptied and scrubbed spotless for her return. She resisted, legs locked, every muscle trembling. That first day, Solara refused to eat. The barn manager, wary, tried grain, then apples, then fresh hay, but the mare only sniffed and turned aside. Lips barely twitching, her water bucket went untouched. She stood motionless at the back of the stall, ears pinned, flinching at every sudden sound. Margot came by that evening, her phone pressed to her ear. She offered soft reassurances for the cameras, but behind closed doors, her patience wore thin. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at the staff after Solara refused to be let out for exercise. "She's always been high-strung, but she's never acted like this. What did that boy do to her?" Dale shook his head, concern deepening. "It's not him, ma'am. Horses grieve. She's lost is all. She needs time. Or someone familiar." Margot's lips tightened. "She'll have to learn. We have appearances to make, sponsors to reassure her. She can't just sulk." Days passed, and Solara's condition only worsened. She ignored her feed, let herself be led only with resistance, and shied away from every unfamiliar hand. When Dale attempted to saddle her for a light ride, she pinned her ears and lashed her tail, sidestepping until he gave up. The barn vet examined her, pronouncing her physically sound, but warning of acute psychological distress. "She's not just stubborn, Miss Vance," the vet said. "This is trauma. If she doesn't eat soon, we'll have real trouble." Behind the scenes, Margot struggled to contain the fallout. Social media boiled over with outrage. "Let her go home" trended on every major platform, and the footage from the courtroom, Solara calming instantly at Kian's touch, the mare's clear refusal to obey Margot's commands, circulated with mounting fury. Petitions sprang up overnight. Local kids taped handmade signs to the riverbend gates. "Let her choose." And "Solara belongs with Kian." News stations ran stories about the healing power of animal bonds, and even celebrities reposted the hashtag, calling for Margot to do the right thing. Sponsors began to call, quietly but persistently, inquiring about Solara's health. Was she fit for the next show? Would she be making her scheduled appearances? Margot's replies grew shorter and colder. In public, she insisted Solara was just settling in. Privately, she scolded her staff for leaks and instructed her PR team to spin a narrative of a rescue and reunion. At the lake cabin, the lost gnawed at Kian like a sickness. He spent his nights scrolling through posts, watching videos of Solara's arrival at Riverbend, each one more painful than the last. Messages poured in from strangers, some angry, some encouraging, a few threatening. Ali kept the news off, but there was no escaping the tension that now hung over their home. Even Layla grew somber, her jokes fading as she watched Kian unravel. "She's not eating," she whispered one night, after a news update. "They said she's wasting away, Kian. This isn't right." Natalie Ramirez, their lawyer, called daily with updates. "We're filing an emergency motion," she promised, voice fierce. "The court needs to see this. Public pressure is on your side." But legal wheels turned slowly, and each day Solara grew thinner, her coat losing its shine, her eyes losing their light. And back at Riverbend, Dale worried openly. He left the radio on low in the barn, hoping music might soothe Solara's nerves. He even called Kian, against Margot's wishes, seeking advice. "She won't even take a treat from me," he admitted quietly. "She just stands there, staring out the window like she's waiting for you." Margot, however, refused to back down. She banned outside visitors, tightened security, and ordered her PR team to drown out negative press with glossy photos of other, happier horses. But her anger grew brittle, her temper snapping at every new headline. "They're turning me into a villain," she fumed to her lawyer. This was supposed to be about principle, about what's right. But as the days dragged on, even Margot couldn't ignore the truth. Solara was wasting away. When the vet returned for a follow-up, the prognosis was grim. If something doesn't change, we could lose her. Some animals just can't survive without the ones they love. Alone in her office, Margot stared at old photos of herself as a young girl, hugging a pony on her family's farm. She remembered the sting of losing her first horse to a better home. Her parents dismissing her tears as childishness. For the first time, doubt crept in, an ache she hadn't felt in years. As another night settled over Riverbend, Solara stood alone in her stall, moonlight striping her golden coat. She looked out toward the lake, toward a world she could still remember, where love was a promise and not a contest. Her whinnies grew softer, but her longing was clear for anyone who cared to listen, and somewhere in the dark, Kian whispered back across the miles, "Hold on, Solara. I'm not giving up on you. Not now. Not ever." Kian had never thought of himself as anyone special, just a quiet kid who lost too much too soon, someone who found comfort in the steady warmth of a horse's breath. But as Solara's health declined at Riverbend and the online uproar grew, he realized he was no longer invisible. The world was watching, waiting to see if the bond between a boy and his horse could withstand the might of money and law. For the first time, he understood that telling their story might be the only way to save her. Natalie, sharp as ever, was the first to push him. "We need more than outrage," she told Kian and Layla one night over dinner, her phone buzzing with messages from reporters and supporters. "We need to show them she's not just a prize. She's family. We need to make it personal. Do you have anything that proves your history with Solara? Photos, videos, anything?" Kian's eyes lit up as Layla nudged his arm. "The tapes," she whispered. "Your mom's old tapes, and all those phone videos. We could make something with them." They pulled out boxes from the attic, dust flying as Kian rummaged through memories, birthday cards, ribbons, and a stack of battered VHS tapes labeled in his mother's neat handwriting, "Kian and Solara. Summer, first ride, county fair, birthday." Layla gathered old phones and digital cameras from drawers, charging batteries and scrolling through tiny screens to find clips of sunlight-drenched afternoons and clumsy, joyful rides. The next day, Layla brought over her laptop and a portable scanner. She was a natural storyteller, funny, persistent, and creative, the kind of friend who refused to let Kian sink into despair. Together, they watched hours of shaky footage, a tiny Kian, barely 7, feeding an awkward golden foal apple slices through a fence. Teenage Kian singing off-key as Solara trotted in circles around a makeshift ring, the way the horse nudged his arm after the funeral, her soft eyes meeting his in silent understanding. "Look at her," Layla whispered, tears in her eyes. "You were both just kids." As they worked, Kian found himself talking more than he had in months, telling Layla stories he'd never shared, not just about Solara, but about his mother, about the hope that flickered even when his father's debts mounted and their world fell apart. With every clip, every snapshot, the story grew richer, no longer just about loss, but about love, resilience, and the kind of memory that endures, even after everything else is gone. Layla edited late into the night, weaving the footage together with captions and gentle music. She interviewed Kian on her phone, his voice rough but honest. She was there for me when nobody else was. She remembers every hug, every secret. She's not just a horse. She's family. They ended the short film with a clip from the courthouse, the moment Solara, wild-eyed and trembling, calmed instantly at Kian's touch. Over it, Layla typed one line. Some bonds are written in the heart, not on paper. With Natalie's help, they posted the video online under the hashtag #SheRemembers. At first, it was just friends and neighbors who shared it. But the power of the images, the authenticity of Kian's story, and the heartbreaking footage of Solara's decline at Riverbend caught the world's attention. Within days, the video went viral. Celebrities and influencers reposted it. Animal rights groups and therapy horse foundations weighed in, urging Margot Vance to reconsider. Donations for Kian's legal fund poured in from across the country. $5, $10, $50 at a time, each with a note, for Solara's, for love, for hope. Major news outlets picked up the story. Journalists reached out for interviews. Natalie fielded calls from morning shows, podcasts, and even a national documentary crew. A reporter from the New York Times called the video a testament to the indelible memory of animals and the power of a child's devotion. For the first time, Kian's small voice echoed far beyond the lake. At Riverbend, Margot watched the story unfold with mounting anxiety. She told her PR team to double down, but nothing could stop the tide. Sponsors grew more nervous, and one quietly pulled out. Dale, the head trainer, found himself rooting for Kian in secret, leaving apples by Solara's stall, reading her the news aloud, hoping the old spark would return. Still, Solara refused to eat, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for a way home. The mounting public pressure forced Margot's hand. She agreed grudgingly, to a temporary arrangement. Solara would be allowed a supervised visit back to Eli's property for observation, at the vet's recommendation, to see if her health would improve in a familiar environment. The legal battle was far from over, but the world was watching, and Margot could no longer afford to be seen as the villain. The day Solara returned to the lake, Kian was waiting by the paddock, hands shaking as the trailer doors opened. The mare hesitated, weak but alert, and when she saw him, she let out a broken, hopeful whinny. Kian held out his arms, and Solara, drawing on the last reserves of her strength, walked into his embrace, resting her head on his shoulder as if no time had passed at all. A crowd had gathered at the fence, neighbors, news crews, children waving hand-painted signs. Tears streamed down faces as Kian led Solara gently into the old barn, the air humming with the shared knowledge that love, once lost, could sometimes find its way home again. That night, as Solara nibbled her first meal in days and Kian slept beside her on a pile of fresh hay, the world outside seemed softer, kinder. Layla came by with soup and a new stack of letters from supporters. Natalie reviewed legal filings, more determined than ever to win the fight. Eli sat on the porch, watching the stars, silent but hopeful for the first time in years. The battle wasn't over. The court date loomed, and Margot was not known for surrender. But the power of history, of shared memory, and stubborn love had turned the tide. In every corner of the internet, people repeated Kian's words. She remembers. And so do we. Night came early that winter week, the air so cold it sharpened every sound across the frozen lake. At Eli's cabin, the porch light glowed gold against the snow, drawing moths and catching the drifting flakes that spiraled down from a silent sky. Inside the barn, the hush was broken only by the gentle rustle of straw and the soft rhythmic breaths of Solara, who was finally, slowly returning to herself. She moved with a weary contentment now, no longer hollow-eyed and frantic, but still fragile, still searching the world for reassurance. Kian slept on a cot in the tack room every night, refusing to leave Solara alone. His world had narrowed to these four walls, feeding, brushing, tending her injuries, reading out loud until his voice gave out and she settled with a sigh. Eli and Layla kept the house warm, kept the news away, and kept hope alive, one bowl of soup or gentle word at a time. Natalie shuttled between the city and the cabin, her energy tireless as she fielded press and prepared for court. The world outside buzzed with updates and commentary, but inside the barn, time stretched and softened, pain mixing with hope, fear with gratitude. On social media, the documentary Kian and Layla had created continued to circulate, new donations pouring in, new stories of lost and found animals echoing their own. Across the country, people whispered encouragement into the cold, willing a miracle for the boy and his golden mare. It was deep into the night, the kind of hour when most of the world sleeps. The headlights sliced the darkness at the end of Eli's drive. A black SUV pulled up, engine idling, exhaust steaming in the frigid air. For a moment, nobody moved. Eli was half dozing in his armchair, Kian buried in the folds of a blanket in the barn. But a quiet figure stepped out of the car, silhouetted against the distant glow of town, and walked toward the stable with measured steps. Margot Vance's breath rose in icy clouds as she paused in the yard, her hand trembling just slightly as she reached for the barn door. She pushed it open quietly, letting in a sweep of cold and a gust of memories she'd long kept buried. Inside, Solara's head snapped up, ears swiveling. Kian stirred from his cot, blinking in the darkness. He recognized Margot immediately, her sharp features softened by fatigue, her coat dusted with snow. For a moment, neither spoke. It was as if the world had narrowed to the quiet barn and the three souls inside, each searching for words that might heal what law and pride had broken. Margot glanced at Solara, her eyes unreadable, then around the barn. Her gaze fell on a cluttered table covered with drawings, childlike sketches in bright marker and pencil, some faded, some fresh. There was Kian and Solara in stick figures, leaping fences, racing the wind, standing side by side beneath a smiling sun. One drawing was old and crinkled. Solara as a foal, nose pressed to a tiny hand. Margot picked it up, running her fingers over the lines. She let out a breath, so soft it nearly disappeared in the cold. "My father used to call ponies a waste of time," Margot said, her voice unexpectedly low, almost fragile. "He sold mine the year I turned 9. Told me I'd outgrown her. I cried for days. I promised myself if I ever had another, I'd never let anyone take her away." And Kian watched her, unsure, but something shifted in him. A flicker of empathy for the woman who, beneath her armor, might be more haunted than he knew. Margot set the drawing back on the table, her gaze fixed on Solara. "I thought winning made everything right. That collecting trophies would fill the spaces where love used to live." Her shoulders dropped, and she looked tired, so much older than when she'd stood, proud and untouchable, at the Riverbend gates. Solara watched her, wary but calm, as if remembering an old kindness from another lifetime. Margot took a careful step forward. "She's different with you, Kian. I see it. Everyone sees it. The world won't let me ignore it anymore." Kian's words came slowly, steady, and true. She remembers, Miss Vance. Not just the training, but everything. She remembers who loved her, and who she loved back." Margot's eyes filled, though she blinked the tears away before they could fall. "I lost myself in all this," she admitted, "in the fight. I forgot what it felt like to love something just because, not because it could win or because it made me important, but because it needed me, because I needed it." The silence held for a long moment, broken only by Solara's quiet breath and the wind rattling a loose board in the wall. "I'm not here to threaten you," Margot finally said. "I just needed to see it for myself, to see if all the noise was true, to remember something I lost a long time ago." She stepped back, glancing once more at the drawings and the horse she had almost loved but never really known. She hesitated at the door, then looked at Kian one last time. "Take care of her, and take care of yourself. The court will have its say, but sometimes the law is just paper. Love is what matters." She left as quietly as she had come, boots crunching in the snow, her shadow long and lonely under the moon. Kian sat in stunned silence, heart racing, not sure if he'd dreamed the entire encounter. He knelt beside Solara, who nuzzled his shoulder, and felt something shift, not just in their story, but in the world outside, where pride might finally begin to yield to love. Long after Margot's SUV disappeared into the night, Kian found himself unable to sleep. He added a new drawing to the table. Solara running free, with himself, Layla, and Eli watching from the shore. In the drawing, the sky was bright and endless, and nothing stood between love and freedom. Not a fence, not a law, not even the shadow of grief. He left the barn door open a crack, as if inviting hope to enter and stay a while. Morning brought a hush of anticipation to the lake cabin. Frost glazed the field in, sparkling under a sky washed clean by night winds. The world felt balanced on the edge of something new. Kian sensed it as he watched the sun rise beside Solara, his hand buried in her soft golden mane, 1,000 thoughts tumbling behind his tired eyes. The barn was quieter now, peaceful. No camera crews, no shouting, just the slow, steady rhythm of healing and routine. Still, the weight of the coming court date pressed on every heart in the house. Meanwhile, in a sunlit office high above the city, Margot Vance sat with her back to a wall of glass, the lights of downtown New York stretching behind her. She had not slept, haunted by the images from the barn. Kian's soft voice, the trust in Solara's eyes, the childish drawings so full of hope. On her desk were stacks of letters and emails, some angry, many pleading, a few simply telling stories of love lost and found, the #hash. She remembers scrolled endlessly across her phone. Sponsors, friends, and even strangers all had opinions. But for the first time in years, Margot wasn't interested in what they thought. She was thinking about her father, about that first pony sold away in the name of moving on, about promises broken, and the cost of pride. She picked up the phone and called her lawyer. "Prepare a statement," she said quietly, "and call the center. I want to do this my way." The announcement came just after noon, a surprise press conference hastily arranged on the front lawn of Riverbend Stables. Reporters scrambled to set up, locals crowded behind barricades, and a hush fell as Margot stepped up to the microphone, dressed not for business, but in an old barn coat and jeans. Her face was drawn, but resolute, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, clear as a bell, ringing across the frosty air. "I've spent my life in competition," Margot began, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "I have always believed in rules, in doing things by the book, in protecting what's mine. But these last weeks have shown me that sometimes the heart writes a different story." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Solara is not just a champion or a possession or even a legacy. She is a living being, and she has made her choice. I've seen it with my own eyes. We all have. I can't ignore it. And I don't want to. Which is why, effective immediately, I am transferring full ownership of Solara to the Lakeside Therapeutic Equestrian Program. On one condition. Kian must join their team as assistant trainer and youth mentor." The crowd erupted, cheers, applause, a few stunned gasps. Reporters pushed forward shouting questions. Margot held up a hand, silencing them. "I'm stepping away from competitive owing," she added, her voice softening. "Not out of defeat, but because I believe in the healing that happens when we let go. I will continue to support the program quietly, so that children and veterans and anyone in need can know the joy of these incredible animals. Some bonds aren't meant to be broken by paper. I see that now." She stepped back, face pale but peaceful, as the world seemed to exhale all at once. Reporters hurried to relay the story. Headlines flashed across screens. "Margot Vance, let's go. Solara's new life begins. #. She remembers movement triumphs. Teen and horse to heal others." The cabin, Kian watched the live stream with Eli, Layla, and Natalie crowded close. When Margot's words rang out, he felt his knees go weak. Solara, as if sensing the moment, let out a soft, joyful whinny and nudged his shoulder, almost knocking him over. Layla screamed and hugged him. Eli wiped away a tear he tried to hide, and even Natalie broke her stoic calm with a whoop of delight. But for Kian, the news was more than just relief. It was a release from the burden he'd carried since his mother died. A promise kept not only to Solara, but to himself. He felt lighter, braver, as if the world had opened up around him. He texted Dale at Riverbend, who replied with a row of exclamation points in a single line. "She's finally free, kid. Go make us proud." Arrangements happened quickly. Margot's legal team handled paperwork with the urgency of people eager to close a chapter. The Lakeside Center, a local nonprofit dedicated to equine therapy for veterans, children with disabilities, and trauma survivors, prepared a stall for Solara and a small apartment for Kian. Margot visited only once, quietly walking the grounds, shaking hands with the staff, and watching Solara run in the paddock, her coat gleaming in the winter sun. "Thank you," Margot said softly to Kian, the words heavy with meaning. "Take care of her. Take care of them all." "I will," Kian promised. And for the first time, Margot smiled. Not a public smile for cameras, but something gentle and real. The kind you give when you finally let go of something heavy. On the first day at the center, local media gathered as Solara was led into her new home. Children waving from the fences, parents dabbing eyes, and a few veterans standing tall and proud at the gate. The director of the program introduced Kian as the new assistant trainer and youth mentor, telling the crowd, "This young man and this horse have shown us what love and memory can do. Now, together, they'll help others heal too." As the crowd cheered, Kian mounted Solara bareback for a short ride around the arena, the winter sun turning her golden coat to fire. He waved to Layla, who was already planning her first volunteer weekend, and to Eli, standing quietly by the rail. The moment felt bigger than anything Kian had ever known. Proof that sometimes the hardest battles end not in victory or defeat, but in hope. A young reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Kian, what would you say to other kids fighting for something they love?" He smiled, looking down at Solara. "Never give up on what you believe in. Sometimes you have to fight for love, but sometimes you just have to let it find its way home." And the world was watching, but for the first time, Kian wasn't afraid. He was exactly where he was meant to be, beside Solara, starting a new chapter, ready to help others find the healing he'd finally found himself. The new year dawned with a promise of fresh beginnings. At the Lakeside Therapeutic Equestrian Center, the snow melted early, revealing green shoots beneath the fences, and the laughter of children returned to the fields. Where the old pain once lingered, something new and gentle began to grow, a sense of purpose that wrapped itself around every paddock and stall. Solara's presence transformed the place. She was a legend in her own right now. The golden mare who had chosen her home, who had survived storm and struggle, who had become more than just a champion. To the children who visited the center, she was magic. To the veterans learning to trust again, she was hope in a living, breathing form. Kian embraced his new role as if he'd been preparing for it all his life. Each day started early, and the sky still streaked with pink as he mucked stalls and led morning walks around the lake. He learned the names and stories of every horse and every person who passed through the gates. Layla was by his side on weekends, brushing tails, organizing tack, and making the kids laugh with wild stories about Solara's adventures. There was one boy, in particular, 10-year-old Marcus, who came to the center on the recommendation of his therapist. Marcus's father was a Marine, home from overseas, but carrying invisible wounds that no medicine seemed to touch. Marcus had retreated into silence, speaking only in whispers, hiding behind his mother's legs whenever strangers tried to coax him out. But Solara seemed to sense the boy's pain. On his first day, she lowered her head and waited perfectly still, as Marcus reached out with trembling fingers to touch her nose. Day after day, Marcus came back. Sometimes he brought carrots, sometimes just quiet company. Eventually he dared to brush Solara's mane, then walk her around the paddock, then ride at a slow, careful walk with Kian by their side. The transformation was gradual, fragile as spring itself. But one afternoon, as his father watched from the fence, Marcus broke into laughter, his voice ringing across the field for the first time in months. Solara helped others too, a young woman recovering from surgery, a firefighter learning to trust her new prosthetic, an elderly man who missed the farm he'd left behind years ago. With every gentle ride, every nuzzle, she gave back the love she had stored through all her hardships. Kian's confidence blossomed in his new home. He grew taller, stronger, the lines of grief on his face slowly replaced with a steady, quiet joy. Under the mentorship of the center's director, he learned the art of therapeutic riding, how to guide a horse's energy to calm a racing heart, how to listen for the silent needs behind every child's silence or every soldier's haunted eyes. Eli visited often, always bringing a sack of apples, and would linger at the fence to watch the sunrise with his nephew. There, Layla started a program for teens, teaching art classes in the hayloft, filling the barn walls with color and hope. Donations continued to pour in, fueled by the legacy of Hash She Remembers and the outpouring of support from around the country. Margot kept her promise to fund the center quietly, never seeking attention, but sometimes visiting in the early hours to walk the paddocks, her posture lighter than it had been in years. She and Kian shared a new understanding, one built not on pride or ownership, but on respect for what it means to let go. One crisp morning, Kian led Solara down to the water's edge, just as the sun broke free of the horizon, painting the lake in bands of gold and rose. The world was still, the air clear, and for a moment everything felt exactly as it should be. Layla joined him, sketchbook in hand, and together they watched as Solara pawed at the shallow water, her mane blowing in the gentle breeze. A small group of kids stood nearby, waiting for their turn to ride. One, a bright-eyed girl with a shy smile, piped up, "Will Solara ever leave again?" Kian knelt beside her, smiling as he stroked the mare's soft neck. "No, sweetheart. She's home now, just like me." The children laughed, the sound rising with the birds. Kian swung himself onto Solara's back, riding bareback along the lake shore, the wind in his face and the world wide open before him. The kids followed, some riding ponies, others waving from the dock, and for the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of light. That evening, as the sky deepened to violet and the stars blinked awake, the center held a small celebration, music, cocoa, and a bonfire ringed with friends old and new. Eli gave a short, gruff speech about second chances and stubborn boys. Layla passed out hand-drawn thank you cards. Marcus's father stood quietly by the flames, tears shining in his eyes as he watched his son play with the other kids. Kian took a moment alone, standing with Solara on the hill above the barn. He thought of his mother and her gentle wisdom, of his journey from grief to hope, of the power of letting go and holding on at the same time. He realized, finally, that Solara's memory was not a burden, but a gift, a living reminder that love, once given, never truly dies. He whispered to Solara, "Thank you for finding your way back, for showing me how to do the same." From the top of the hill he could see the lights of the barn, hear the laughter and music, feel the world moving forward with every heartbeat. Solara pressed her nose into his shoulder, warm and steady. The story that began with a storm and a desperate escape had come full circle. Now, every dawn brought new beginnings, every evening brought peace. The wounds of the past remained, but they no longer defined what came next. As Kian and Solara stood together in the cool night, the stars above, the world before them, and the promise of healing in every breath, they both knew they were, finally, truly home. Underscore, 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 underscore. And so, in the golden light of a new day, their story, one of memory, courage, and the healing power of love, became a lesson for all who listened. Never underestimate the heart's ability to remember, to forgive, and to lead us home.